The genealogy of Adam is very interesting because it introduces you to a man named Noah. Adam is Noah's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, meaning they are related by a series of fathers and sons. The Bible's genealogy in Genesis 5 traces this line from Adam through Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and finally to Noah. Adam was alive when Noah's father was born, so it's possible that they knew each other. It is our belief here on Digging Deeper that the conditions of the pre-flood earth, or not having the complete degenerative effect of the fall of man in the gene pool, so when men began to populate upon the earth, there were daughters of men being married to sons of God. This part of the chapter can be difficult, because there are different beliefs about what was meant by the sons of God, but the Bible is not clear on what is meant by this particular labeling. There are many who see the sons of God as being from the line of Seth, while others believe they were rebels, perhaps demons, or aliens, but because there is no direct biblical answer, the exact identification remains a mystery. But these men, or beings, took on human wives in the form of daughters of men. All of the ideas in regards to who the sons of God were are mere speculation. But what we do know is that if power is not kept in check, chaos is a direct result. We saw this in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve disobeyed God's instructions. And we see it still today. But these sons of God were marrying daughters of men, which was an example of an intermarriage, of an ungodly marriage, because there is not a whole lot to work off of. Speculating on the nature of these beings only wastes time. But it does appear there was an immoral sexual union involved. If these women of men were regular women, and they were marrying angels or demons, this would indeed pollute the genetic pool of mankind, which would be why the coming Christ would have to be born to a woman of purity in the form of the Virgin Mary. This may sound far-fetched, but when you consider that God prepared a plan to repopulate the earth by destroying most all of his polluted creation and start again using Noah and his family. When we read that God's Spirit will not strive with man forever, we are reading that there will be an end to this rebellion at some point, as there will be a point of no return in rejecting God, because he will say enough is enough. When we are told that the days shall be 120 years, we are not being told that life is limited to just 120 years, but rather this was the timeline of the flood, or the time left before the flood would take place. Of course, there are other interpretations, but we at Digging Deeper believe that his days shall be 120 years refers to the time of left for the flood. In other words, the flood would occur 120 years after the announcement. The giants upon the earth is one more illustration that the sons of God were not regular human men, but another ungodly existence. And the mighty men of old, men of renown, are not mentioned, which illustrates that they were wiped out of the history books of man, but other great men, like Noah to come, exalted themselves, and their names have stood the test of time. The New International Version translates the Hebrew word gibber as heroes, but the King James Version, which we prefer here at Digging Deeper, translates this as mighty men, which is an important difference. When you think about a hero, this is typically someone good. But it is clear from the first few verses that the sons of God were not good, so the idea they were heroes is certainly misleading. This is even further supported by the next few verses, as we are told that every intent of the thoughts of the heart was evil, which means there was nothing that sin had not corrupted. As we will learn later in Matthew, Jesus informs us that the coming of the Son of Man will be like the days of Noah, which means Noah's times were indeed evil and corrupt. It is interesting to compare the times, as it appears regardless how much advancements are made in the form of technology and medicine and every other area, our circumstances and conditions do not. Up until this point, this grieved God's heart. And it still does today, as well. But this does not mean that this was a surprise to God, as God knows all things. You may ask yourself why God would create a creation that would turn against Him, or disobey, which is a good question. And while there can be different answers, or no good answer for many, the fact remains that God Himself is affected by what takes place here below as He is feeling toward human sin. There are many examples of God's mercy toward His creation. And just one example of this is Noah finding grace in the eyes of God. Noah did not deserve this grace, but like the rest of us, it can be found. This is saying a lot, as the conditions of mankind were so poor that it produces a real emotion of grief in God, our Creator. God did not regret creating His creation, nor did He doubt Himself for creating human beings. But He sorrowed by the ungodliness and wickedness taking place. Noah was a regular man. He found grace in the eyes of God. But Scripture tells us that he was perfect in his generation. This does not mean that Noah was perfect, but rather he was uncorrupted by Satan, so it is probably fair to say that Noah was pure. Not perfect, but pure in the way he lived. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, who were used in great ways for the foundation of humanity. The great Charles Spurgeon once spoke about Noah, explaining, "Did Noah live a perfect life? No," speaking popularly, and as the Scripture often speaks. We may say that Noah's character was a righteous one. There must have been flaws in it, and, certainly, after this time, there was one great sad flaw, of which it is not necessary now to speak more particularly. Still, God regarded him as righteous, the wickedness on display including corruption, sexual immorality, and violence, and God knew that all the flesh was corrupted, so much so that God told Noah that the people along with the earth would be judged. And since the fall of man, this has been our destination. Since the fall of man, we all owe a judgment, and while we do owe one death, time and method are in the hands of God. Remember, we are told that intermarriage between these sons of God and daughters of men was not permissible by God. But the problem of this time went far beyond ungodly marriage. Again, there was grace to be found from God, as God did not destroy the entire human population but preserved the bloodline with Noah. What comes next is how this would come to fruition, as God tells Noah to make himself a project, which means that this was Noah's project to finish. And when we understand just how grand this ark was, we understand it was not a boat. Research shows that an average land animal on the ark was no bigger than a sheep, maybe even less. So understanding how large this vessel was should not surprise you that there was plenty of space for all the inhabitants upon the ark. The idea of an ark was probably confusing to Noah because, at this point in history, it had never rained before, so imagine the amount of faith that Noah had to take on a project for something that he, nor anyone else, had ever experienced up until that point. When God says to make it with pitch inside and outside, this is insulating the ark so that it could be preserved for a long period of time. For me, it sounds like God had meant for the structure to last longer than just the month or so it would be used, and when you research the ark and the historical documents of it, this is a fair conclusion to reach. Everything upon the earth shall die, or everything that was upon the earth that was not inside the ark shall die. And again, imagine the amount of faith it took for Noah to take on this project. 2 had never rained before, and God was letting Noah know that nothing would be the same ever again. It probably can be said that Noah was called to be an essential part of the judgment of this world. But despite the judgment that was to come upon the earth, God made a covenant with Noah as a way to make salvation possible for the earth. Inside the ark was Noah and his family, his wife, 3 sons, and their wives, and all the different animals, not to mention all the food that he could gather. Considering all the circumstances surrounding this situation, this was a very task-oriented projected. And while we are not told all of the details, Noah did obey. It does not state that he complained. And maybe he did, but at the end of the day, he did as instructed, which is one more illustration that Noah was perfect in his generation, and is an example of how we are to live today. First, notice that in Noah's case, faith was the first principle. The text begins, by faith Noah. We shall have to speak about his fear. Being moved by fear, we shall also remember his obedience. For he prepared an ark to the saving of his house. But you must take distinct note that at the back of everything was his faith in God. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, June 1, 1890.